The Europeans have allowed themselves to become vassals of the United States. But their understanding of this deal was, that the great king, the U.S., was the leader of, global hegemony, of which they were a part. Though there's secondary, there's subsidiary figures or entities in this arrangement. They can bask in the light. They're part of the international rules-based order, we can call it, or just, I think, really more justly, Western hegemony. They're close to the center if they're not the center. But yeah, he seems to be breaking that down. I mean, there's a recognition of the other powers. They find it very disturbing because they have. I think Europe of even 25 years ago would not have found this disturbing, but they have gone long ways down this path towards, you could say, ideological purity, in the service of global hegemony. And part of that is that everything outside of our community is evil. And, this seems to explain a lot of their behavior. Like we were just recently talking about the energy links between Russia and Europe. I mean, it just doesn't make a bit of economic sense. The whole thing is just so bizarre, cutting off these pipelines. Very recently, we had the Baltic states disconnecting themselves from the Russian electricity grid, and immediately their prices doubled, but now they're somehow free. And it doesn't make a bit of sense. It really doesn't. The only way to really explain this behavior is in terms of a need to maintain ideological purity. And one thing that, Trump he's not ideologically pure. He's really messing up. He's attacking, the kind of the foundations of their faith in a way. I thought this is who we were. And he's speaking in ways that he's not supposed to speak, and they find it very scary. Now there's a more practical aspect to it too. It's just that, he is also making noises, and we may learn more about this at the Munich Security Conference, which I think is going on right now. But he's been making noises about reducing U.S. troop presence in Europe. And he's long said that Europe needs to increase, the European countries need to increase their defense budgets. He wants them to rise to 5% of GDP. From the 2%, which some of them are meeting that, particular target now and others aren't. So that's, that puts a real economic burden on them. They're in a fix because their economies are not strong. And again, they don't have the dollar as a reserve currency, so they can't just print money. When they increase their defense budget, they have to reduce other parts of their budget, the social services and so forth, things that are popular with their people. And I think Schultz just the other day was very frank about that. Yeah, we got to increase our defense budget. So people just have to accept that they're going to get less in other areas. But this puts them in a tough spot, doesn't it? I mean, because again, a lot of these, as we know, many of these governments are very unpopular in a rather precarious position. And there is a populist right that is rising in many parts of Europe and is threatening the establishment there. And a populist right that's kind of similar in the outlook that Trump has. So they find the whole thing terrifying. It's just their whole world is being torn down. And then one other thing, just on the economic front, is that Trump is saying that, okay, yeah, this is going to be, the U.S. has been carrying a lot of this burden right now, helping to support Ukraine. Yeah, we really don't want to do that anymore. And it's going to be your job to do that from now on. And then when it's time to rebuild Ukraine, which is going to be a very, very expensive project, that's for you Europeans to deal with. So all this is very, very bad news for the Europeans.
Yeah, but I would be in a state of panic over the past 2-3 years of the Ukraine war, because this is clearly not going well for us. All of our, armaments are just being depleted. Our munitions are gone. They haven't done anything. And we have this mess. The United States, our greatest ally, our glorious leader, blew up our largest energy infrastructure in Europe. And now our economy is in tatters. The people are upset. We got a flood of immigration and
Right.
issues with, Ukrainian refugees and everything else. It's like, this is a disaster. I just feel like you would be like, oh, thank goodness.
Yeah.
Thank goodness.
Right.
Like, when
Well,
someone's
that's what
talking to
exactly.
him. Like,
That's what a reasonable person would think, and that's the way, for example, Viktor Orban or Robert Fico. That's the way they look at it. Those are the two at present, the two dissident countries in Europe. But now it looks like we may have more. Romania may go ahead and hold elections, and Georgescu is likely to win. So we'll have another dissident government. Austria is in the process of forming a government, and that too, I think, would be fairly described as dissident on geopolitical issues. And then there's even, I don't know how likely this is, but like the Czech government, which is now very, very much in the hegemony camp, could lose the upcoming election, and then we could have a dissident government there. That's a real. You have these two small countries now, and the rest of Europe can ignore them and threaten them and bully them, and that's what they've been doing. But if you have four countries, and one of them's Austria, it just becomes much more difficult. It's a real a division within Europe. But anyway, I just brought up these people because they're reasonable, and I think their reaction would be like yours. Of course, that's why they're growing in popularity. That is a very reasonable way to look at it. Yeah, this is not helping us. This Ukraine war has been very damaging to us. We need to end this.
right.
But the people in charge just don't think rationally. They've committed. They're trapped within their own rhetoric, you could say. The reality that they've created, this ideological reality, this fight between good and evil, and they can't get out of it. It was pointed out that the Biden administration very much fed into that. They were part of it. But we are getting a dose of realities. It's just for the first time. Pete Hegseth was, I think, in a recent interview, and he's in Europe now. He's at the Munich Security Conference. He said, we just need to be realistic. There's just no way that Ukraine can take back these territories. It's just not going to happen. So let's talk. Let's be real. And that's something that nobody or you very rarely heard beforehand. You certainly didn't hear it from somebody at his level, in his high position. So yeah, that's encouraging. We're getting reality is intruding, and I think it's for the benefit of Europe. It's probably the benefit of all those parties that are challenging the global hegemonist establishment there.
I guess it's just so hard for me to understand when you hold on to a position or a policy that just becomes increasingly unpopular. Why do you just keep on holding on to it? Why is there
Yeah,
no course correction? It's
right.
just they're incapable. Are these people robots? Have they just been
Yeah,
programmed a certain
yeah,
way
they're
and they
not
cannot
robots, but
change?
people can commit themselves to irrational ideas. You become emotionally invested in them, where it becomes their reality, and that's who they are. And then when you challenge it, it just becomes like you're challenging me. You're challenging this. It's that their whole world seems to be based on this idea that, again, we're the community of the virtuous. We are the morally pure people, and there are those ogres and demons out there. And you're telling me that I have to go and shake hands with them. It's just they can't be. And you're making these arguments about impracticalities and economic costs and so on. Well, I don't care. Because this is for them, it's an existential question. It's like we cease to be the Europeans as they understand them now. Like the European values, so called. It will mean that the forces of evil have conquered if we give in on this. So we just can't listen to any of this. We just have to double down. I know it's not. They have to reject reality in order to hold on to these beliefs. Again, these are very deeply seated. It's clear you're listening to them. It's just like evidence keeps on piling up. This is not working. This doesn't make sense, and they keep on doubling down.
Right. There's a lot of over the past couple of years, there's always been a lot of fear mongering and this idea that Russia will just continue to steamroll through the rest of Europe, and that's why we have to make this stand. Constant World War II references and Hitler rising and be invading Poland, all this stuff. But do you think people actually have a real fear of this happening? Is that still something that people believe within Europe, or?
Yeah, it's hard to say. They talk like this. Again, I think it was just a few days ago. Well, we're going to be at war with Russia, and like within 5 years. I think it was maybe the former defense secretary in the UK said that. But he wouldn't be alone in saying things like that. But then you look at the concrete steps that they take, and it doesn't seem to reflect that belief. If you really believe that Russia might be invading you in a few years, you would put your economy on a war footing. You would, right? If you really believe that, you'd say, well, what did UK did? They kicked it up, but just a bit, just like 0.7% from 2.5 to 3.2. Maybe that actually might be too high. Yes. But it just ticked it upwards, and it would be, and if you look honestly at their military capabilities right now, they are just pathetic. They actually would have to go up to 6 or 7% for several years to build up a considerable military force. They have a pathetic force. They have fewer soldiers than they had, like before the Napoleonic Wars in the early 19th century, and their navy, their military equipment has been greatly depleted as a result of the Ukraine war, and what they have left is frankly junk. I think, again, I know I've mentioned this a couple times, but it was a think tank, a British or American think tank that concluded that in a real war, all-out war with Russia, land war, they would run out of munitions within a week. So what are you talking about? I mean, it's just like, oh, now we're going to spend 3% or something on defense. So that's just, you're just not talking about reality. And that's what you find out across Europe. So it makes me think, I don't know, but it's hard to explain, but maybe deep down they don't really believe it. It's just something they use to justify their position, to explain themselves to their people.
Hey guys, I hope you're enjoying the conversation so far. I promise to only take 1 minute of your time. If you're using AI, please consider checking out my website, novlisky.io. So what we built here at Novlisky is an AI hub. It allows you to access hundreds of AI models. We update them as soon as a new model comes out. It is integrated into our system, and you can use them all under one platform. And another thing that's so great about this website is that you can easily use multiple models at the same time to compare which is best for whatever use case. So for example, I'm going to use Anthropic and GPT-4 at the same time. So I get side-by-side results. I use this in my work every single day. I think you'll find it incredibly useful. There's tons of customizations. We have an iOS and Android native app as well. So you have seamless synchronization across all devices. So please check it out. I think it's something you'll find incredibly useful. There are no subscription fees, no rate limits. I guarantee you it's going to save you money, and it's just going to keep you on top of all AI releases.
Right. Yeah, anybody rational looking at it would just, they'd say that there's no way Russia wants it. No. I feel like, other than Israel, I feel like it doesn't make any sense for nations don't have the desire to establish Vichy governments and be occupying forces. It's just a mess. It just doesn't work. Right. It's always will fall apart. And
it's extremely costly too for the occupying power. For example, we've talked about, I don't think Russia wants to go into Western Ukraine. It may feel like it's forced to in the end, but it would be very costly, in both lives and in treasure.
Right. I mean, there's, potential that Russia would just have more influence and potential control. But then you look at, what the U.S. does. The U.S. controls Europe. We don't occupy it. Well, in a way we do. We have military bases all over there. But, we have instruments of control. We control the EU. We control them through NATO and all this influence. Don't you feel like that the Europeans and especially the Ukrainians are looking at the U.S. and being like, why are we being controlled by the U.S.? That's where the real, invasion essentially is from. If you want to think about a modern day occupation, it's through this. It's like these institutions that are controlling us and telling us that, we have to spend X amount of money on our military equipment. They will blow up our energy infrastructure. You have to buy our energy. You can't do this. You have to stop trade with China. You can't do what is this? Why are they looking at, just rationally, I don't want Europe to look at America as the bad guy, I hope we change all this stuff, that we control them. But the idea of just vilifying Russia constantly, when Russia's the one that really is the one that's able to help you and do things for you, instead the U.S. is the one that's controlling your country.
Right. Well, it's a huge mistake that they've made. And again, those dissident parties that are rising and dissident governments in Europe would agree with you. Those are the same arguments that they're making. That's the reality they see it. And I think that's the reality. It's been a huge mistake for Europe to just subordinate themselves to the U.S. Again, as I know I've said earlier, the EU was originally conceived as a project for European sovereignty. You say that if we come together, we become one of the great powers of the world, and then we can be a great power in our own right. We don't have to just follow the U.S. lead. But it hasn't worked out that way, as we can see. It's actually becoming the EU, the centralized structure, based in Brussels, has become a means of occupation, an instrument of American domination, you could say. Now, this domination I don't think it's so much military. Well, there's always a threat. You say they justify themselves. It's, we're the power that can protect you. But it's not through direct military occupation. It's not that the soldiers are leaving their European bases and firing at Europeans or threatening to shoot them or anything like that. Okay, it's not like that. And let's be honest, that happened like in the days of the Soviet Union, the Warsaw Pact. So it is, in many ways, it's a softer kind of occupation, but it's an occupation nonetheless. It's mainly exercised through, let's say, economic and influence and soft power. I think it's mainly ideological. It's the neoconservatism which arose in the U.S. and didn't used to exist in Europe. I mean, it was not a dominant force 20 years ago in Europe. But it has since become one. It's just there's been this constant pressure, and it's hard to explain. But the neoconservatives succeeded. They have made good little neoconservatives out of all of these European leaders, and they're firmly convinced of this. Sometimes they quote actually the neoconservatives directly. I think it was the former. You could call him the foreign minister for the EU, Joseph Borrell, actually quoted Kagan, who was like the neocon godfather back in the U.S., the husband of Victoria Nuland.
Okay, we're back. Small technical difficulties. You were just talking about Kagan and
right.
neocons.
So Kagan, you could describe him as like the godfather of the neocons, the husband of Victoria Nuland. He's been quoted directly by European leaders, in particular, probably the most famous example is Joseph Borrell, the former head of, you could say, kind of like the head foreign diplomat of the European Union, a position that has since been filled by Kaja Kallas, who was even crazier than he was. But yeah, his notorious description of Europe as a garden and the rest of the world as a jungle was actually taken directly from Kagan. It was actually a title of his book. It just shows you the extent to which and the depth to which neocon thinking has penetrated the elite in Europe. And again, that used to not be true, especially in places like France. The French had a real independent streak. And if you remember, like during the Iraq War under George W. Bush, the French resisted, and that's why they were mocked and vilified by the Americans. They actually resisted, but that just doesn't happen now. It seems like the entire French elite now bows down before the U.S. Now, it doesn't, it's, as we pointed out, it's not done at the point of a gun. It has been the success of these various, I think, soft power operations, the NGOs, and it shows there must have always been some kind of softness, a weakness at the center of Europe for them to fall for this, to become so completely subservient, a lack of confidence in their own, in a truly independent European way. They ended up kind of just they felt happier as vassals, rather than as leaders. And so when the neocons pushed, they just didn't find much resistance. And so now you have a Europe that's really dominated by neoconservative ideology, and one that's in a real fix now, that you have somebody who is not a neocon, Donald Trump, president of the U.S., and he's come back. The first time they managed him. This time, it's not so clear that they can. They will fight back. So let's remember, this is just like the opening shots in the battle. And Trump has come out, with his gun blazing, and has done a lot of damage. And it seems like the opposition has just been completely taken aback. They're on the back foot. They haven't really put up any notable resistance. But I think over time we'll see them regroup and fight back, and they've got their own levers. They have their allies within the deep state. It's not that Trump has destroyed the deep state; he's going after it. But this is just the opening battle in a war. We'll see.
I feel like it's over, to be honest. No, I mean, just Ukraine has just been such an unmitigated disaster. It's been so unpopular. The deep state is being exposed. People are aware. The populations are rejecting this. I feel like the unipolar moment is done. I feel like neoconservatism is dying. And I think Trump has truly killed it. There might be a couple gasps, but I don't believe that there's support for this ideology anymore.
Well, there's still a lot of very powerful people that you can fairly describe as neocons.
Like who?
Well, again, like Keir Starmer or Macron or something.
But they're not powerful anymore. Well, they're done.
Well,
they're done.
But they still...
Schultz is done. They still have a way Macron is done.
Right,
they're all done.
They've had a way of hanging on to power. I mean, Macron should have been gone. And it looks like he may go. That will be another huge blow to the neocons if an election is held soon, because it's very possible. It's certainly not certain, but it's very possible that Marine Le Pen will win that election. And so then we're talking about these smaller states in Eastern Europe, then possibly Austria. But then if you have France, that's huge. That would be a huge earthquake in Europe. So, yeah, I mean, they are, you say they're losing, they're losing their hold, but it isn't over. And they've fought dirty in the past. We've seen it, and they may have more tricks up their sleeves. So, I wouldn't count them out. But I would agree in a way that the unipolar moment is over, that these actions by Trump, but also words like from Marco Rubio and Hegseth and so on and so forth, signal an end to it. Now, the believers in in Western hegemony, and I would like to emphasize that Trump himself still has, his America First isn't just about a humbler America. He does seem to, at times, talk about America as the king of the world, but not as the proponent of a certain ideology, the way that the neocons think of it, but he's just talking about raw power and control over material resources. So there are those impulses that are still hegemonic, within him, but they're not neocon, and I think that's good. Partly it's just, again, as we said about him, he says the unsaid things, the secrets that everybody used to share within the establishment. He says those things out loud, and he talks about naked American interest. And I think in the end, that doesn't mean that American hegemony ends tomorrow, Western-led hegemony ends, but it does actually deal a real blow to it. Because, as I said earlier, it's just, again, soft power is a huge part. We saw it in Europe, and we see it in other parts of the world. Soft power is the way that the U.S. has held on to much of the world. And I think that, this new thinking, this cruder way of thinking, it's not going to persuade people around the world to align themselves with the U.S. They're going to see that this is clearly, about American self-interest. And here I am in Georgia. Why should I support that? Here I am in Egypt, or if we're talking about the elite in Egypt, why should I support that? I think in the end, it's going to be hugely damaging. But it's just not, okay, this Western hegemony is not going to disappear tomorrow. But, I agree, just by talking the way that he's talking, even if he has some hegemonic impulses himself, and I think he does, we're seeing the sun setting on the global empire. Let's put it that way.